With the latest Halo Infinite gameplay reveal, it's the perfect time to look at the evolution of Halo's gameplay and how it has gradually evolved across all the mainline games. Very few franchises have maintained the legacy that Halo commands in the gaming world. The impact of Halo and Master Chief as cultural icons remains undisputed for many fans and became one of the driving forces in establishing Microsoft and the Xbox in the console gaming space. It all began with Halo Combat Evolved. Released in 2001 as a launch title for the Xbox, the first Halo introduced players to Master Chief, the iconic super soldier, and featured responsive and satisfying gunplay, making it one of the standout console shooters. As Master Chief, you had an energy shield and a health bar keeping you alive as you fight the two main enemy factions, the Covenant and the Flood. There were plenty of weapons, but unlike other popular shooters that allowed you to carry multiple weapons, Halo restricted you to carrying only 2 at a time. This forced the player to experiment with different loadouts to deal with a variety of enemy types using both UNSC and Covenant weapons. Vehicular combat put the player into a third-person perspective as they controlled tanks, ghosts, banshees, and the classic Warthog. The game's AI would even ride along on the Warthog and provide suppressing fire from different parts of the vehicle that eventually became an essential part to the campaign's gameplay. Halo also had multiplayer support, but this came before Xbox Live was even a thing, meaning split-screen co-op for the game's campaign and competitive multiplayer were the main ways friends would dive into the game together. Halo quickly became a commercial and critical success and staked its claim as one of the best shooters of all time. And thankfully, Halo's success paved the way for its sequels.
Sir, permission to leave the station.
For what purpose, Master Chief?
To give the Covenant back their bomb.
Halo 2's biggest change from the get-go was duel building. There was something extremely novel and honestly badass about mixing together old and new weapons for some entertaining combinations. There was also the addition of a whole new character to the campaign, the Arbiter. The Arbiter could cloak himself and remain camouflaged for short periods of time, but didn't have the flashlight that Master Chief's Spartan armor suit had to illuminate dark areas. The health bar from the first game was no longer a part of the gameplay. Instead, the player would need to just worry about the energy shield. New enemies also made their debut in Halo 2 with the Brutes, a hostile group that would go on to fight both the UNSC and the Elites. The most significant evolution from Combat Evolved to Halo 2 was the inclusion of Xbox Live support, making Halo 2 the first game in the franchise to officially offer online multiplayer. Players would simply select the game mode and then be automatically connected with other gamers online based on the mode and map type, bringing the massive 16-player matches to the mainstream rather than just the small subset of players who had the means to set up LAN parties. Halo 2 would also mark the beginning of a lengthy absence from PC ports for future titles in the franchise. Master Chief's story arc in the original Bungie trilogy would reach a well-deserved climax in Halo 3, aided by a nice graphical update with its debut on the Xbox 360. The campaign expanded to allow up to 4-player co-op missions, but only 2 players could play on each console at a time, requiring either System Link or Xbox Live for that full party of 4. Halo 3 also introduced support weapons. These heavy weapons would take the player out into a third-person viewpoint and offer some pretty good firepower at the expense of mobility. Another evolution of its gameplay was the use of equipment. Although you could only use equipment once, each type would shift the gameplay and allow the player to incorporate various abilities. Some of those abilities included the bubble shield, the trip mine, and the power drain, and quickly became staples in the Halo franchise. Halo 3 was the first time that players got to experience Forge, allowing players to adjust existing maps to create an individualized gameplay experience. One of the DLC maps, Foundry, was one of the first maps designed specifically with Forge in mind, and all of the maps in Forge could be saved and shared among the community. Being on the Xbox 360 infrastructure, multiplayer on Xbox Live experienced several boons in terms of the user interface and ease of access. Players would group up in parties on the 360 and then hop into matches together. Halo 3 took significant steps towards integrating modes that weren't just giving different ways to play, but different ways to experience the game. For example, Theater was a neat concept that gave players the ability to rewatch matches and record save footage, both from campaign and multiplayer modes, and became a popular addition.
Tested. Double kill.
Halo 3 ODST's gameplay shifts from the original trilogy. You play as ODSTs, or Orbital Drop Troopers, meaning you no longer have the ability to dual wield. The energy shield was also gone, and in its place was a mechanic that involved stamina, creating a gameplay experience similar to the first Halo. ODST also offered visual HUD changes in its visor mode, which would illuminate enemies, allies, and items of interest in all different colors. Multiplayer in ODST was just Halo 3 and shared Halo 3's servers. The multiplayer came on a separate disc that was practically Halo 3 with the addition of 3 ODST maps: Citadel, Heretic, and Longshore. The campaign would still allow players to go through the story cooperatively, but the structure of ODST's campaign departed from the typical linear storytelling of past Halo games. ODST had a more open-world campaign, allowing you to reach several objectives or beacons in any given order. In the open-world section taking place in New Mombasa, you play as a rookie ODST, but would also play as missing comrades during flashback missions to piece together what happened to them. This concept of storytelling allowed the player to gradually unravel the plot at their own pace, while allowing them to explore New Mombasa. ODST also introduced Firefight, which was the first horde mode in the Halo franchise. It consisted of enemy waves growing more difficult the longer you survived, and the mode also allowed for online matchmaking, system link, local play, and split-screen co-op. One of the most beloved games in the franchise, Halo Reach, was a prequel to the original Bungie trilogy. The main character in Reach was another Spartan super soldier, Noble 6, which meant that the energy shield was back, but so was the health bar, requiring an extra eye during combat sequences akin to Combat Evolved. The rest of the Noble team consisted of a diverse cast of characters which encouraged different playstyles throughout the campaign due to the specific gameplay sequences. In one instance, you aggressively pursue an enemy with Noble 5 weapons free. Another mission would have you posted up on a sniper outpost with Noble 3, requiring more deliberate shots and movement to make your way past a larger Covenant group. Equipment in Reach now had a cooldown timer preventing any spamming and moved away from the single-use concept in Halo 3. Jetpacks, sprint, and active camo were just some of the game's different equipment, allowing for different gameplay styles and interactions during combat. For the first time in Halo, there was an aerial dogfighting mission, and in this chapter the player flies a UNSC ship and defends the objective by defeating waves of Covenant ships. The gameplay lets you fly from a third-person perspective, gave you several ways to maneuver in space, and was an unexpected change of pace. Firefight and Forge returned in Reach along with multiplayer and Reach-exclusive game types such as Headhunter, Generator Defense, and Invasion, with many of them incorporating new ideas like pitting Spartan humans against Covenant elites. At last, we've reached the era where Bungie officially departed. Despite some reservations from the community, Halo 4 incorporated several exciting additions to the Halo universe and the gameplay. First off was the introduction of a completely new enemy faction, the Prometheans. These enemies had different types of knights or crawlers and brought a whole new set of weapons. UNSC and Covenant weapons also returned, offering a varied arsenal for Master Chief. New armor abilities consisted of things like a hard light shield, Promethean vision, and an auto sentry turret. Halo 4 also allowed the player to sprint at any time. Until this point, Halo had always kept the player at one set speed, which was growing increasingly at odds with other modern shooters that had embraced sprinting as a core gameplay mechanic. New story additions were added post-release in the form of Spartan Ops. The episodic mode was playable cooperatively or solo and replaced Firefight mode altogether. Unfortunately, some of the most significant changes from the past Halo games weren't necessarily welcome in Halo 4. The multiplayer was overhauled much to the dismay of the online community. The competitive multiplayer was known as War Games, and gone were the weapons placed around the map in favor of Call of Duty-style loadouts and ordnance drops. Players could now spawn in automatically with whatever standard weapons they saw fit to use. Meanwhile, ordnance drops would gradually appear as the match progressed, visible to the player, and contain the more powerful weapons. Halo 5 Guardians introduced several changes that brought Halo in line with aspects typical of first-person shooters that were oddly absent from Halo games in the past. ADS was now available for every gun, and armored abilities were replaced with Spartan abilities, which involved using thrusters to move in any direction. You could use the thrusters in different ways. For example, you could quickly perform a side dash and gain leverage against an enemy. Meanwhile, using that same thruster while sprinting at full speed would trigger a shoulder bash, and even crouching while in a full sprint would perform a slide, the first we'd seen in the series. In Halo 5, you could command and give out instructions to your AI squad, and unlike in previous games, they would stick around for the entire game. If playing with friends in co-op, the squad mates would take the role of the AI squad, which meant different gameplay experiences since each character had different starting weapons and even visual HUD changes. Similar to Halo 2's Arbiter, Spartan Locke was a playable character opposite of Master Chief. Despite the co-op support, Halo 5 only allowed players to join together through Xbox Live, with split screen becoming a thing of the past. The lack of local play extended to Halo 5's multiplayer as well. However, Halo 5 made several changes to improve upon the missteps of Halo 4. The arena-style combat was back with the removal of weapon loadouts. If you wanted a DMR or a battle rifle, you could no longer spawn in with it, but had to scour the map to find it in its spawn point. Warzone was a brand new multiplayer mode that mixed AI enemies alongside an opposing human team. The massive 24-player mode had teams compete by clearing out AI enemies and bases to earn victory points. Defeating AI bosses, enemies, and maintaining control of the bases would gain victory points. However, there was an additional way to win the match. If a team captured all 3 bases, they could attack and destroy an enemy power core. A new rec system could be used in the mode, encouraging players to commit to the multiplayer and redeem their rec points in Warzone.
Rec confirmed.
Halo 5 also looked fantastic visually thanks to the Xbox One's processing power, but now that we near the final quarter of 2020, all eyes are ahead to the new console generation. 343 Industry undoubtedly has to find a way to bring Master Chief back to the forefront of badassery while maintaining Halo's multiplayer legacy.
We need to run! No, we need to fight.
Which brings us to one of the most anticipated games of the decade so far. Halo Infinite has finally revealed its gameplay, and right out of the gate, we can already spot several changes. The grapple shot was shown off plenty during the Xbox Game Showcase demo, and it allowed Master Chief to grab items from a distance and throw them at enemies, or lock onto objects and enemies themselves to close the gap rapidly. Another piece of equipment spotted in the demo was called a drop wall, and it mimicked the bubble shield but spanned a wider area, taking up damage directed at Master Chief. Another subtle action confirmed was the return of the sprint and the slide, but there were also a bunch of weapons shown off, like automatic machine guns and a new shotgun. The primary antagonist this time around is the Banished, a splinter group of Covenant that features many of Halo's classic enemies and the return of the Brutes. There's a tactical map in the demo as well that implies a larger open world and elements of a non-linear pace. Halo has come a long way since the early days of Combat Evolved. Let us know in the comments if the demo has you sold on Halo Infinite, or if you're excited to see more as we get closer to launch. With all the hype surrounding Halo Infinite, there's sure to be even more content to look forward to, so for any news, impressions, and video content on Halo Infinite, stick to GameSpot.